You know, there are a lot of environmental scientists today that are showing evidence that we're heading to the abyss with the environment. Is this inevitable? There's a lot of evidence that suggests that it might be. But I'm here to tell you it's absolutely not inevitable. So when I was a boy, I got to grow up beside the beach in Australia, warm waters. And when I was 9, somebody gave me a face mask, and I put my head underwater, and I saw the underwater world for the first time, and I became absolutely enthralled. And it's excited me ever since, and I've spent as much time as I can on the water and under the water. And over the first few years of this, I became fascinated by seaweed. Seaweed is quite fragile, most of it. You can break it off quite easily with your hands. And yet, even in the wildest storms with huge waves, these seaweeds hang on just fine. Almost all of them survive. So that was really interesting to me, and I spent a lot of time daydreaming in school and thinking about what was going on here. And I was watching how fish swim and all these patterns of movement in nature. And seaweed looks like it's chaotic in the current, just like leaves on a tree when the wind blows, look chaotic. But after a while, I noticed that all these weeds were changing their shape to really the path of least resistance, to let the force of waves go by. So what was that path? Well, it was a swirling shape, which I then realized it was exactly the same as when I pulled the plug out of the bathtub and that whirlpool occurred. So it turns out that a whirlpool is actually the path of least resistance in nature. And every living thing goes through a liquid phase in its development, and it takes on the geometry of water flow. And in our universe, everything is moving, and all of that movement is referred to as turbulent. Turbulence is swirling flows that are basically whirlpools or fragments of whirlpools. This is what nature does everywhere. So every living thing, every part of every living thing is built to that geometry. And we see it in the human body. Our human heart is pumping through 60,000 miles of veins. And the heart muscle is the shape of a whirlpool. And our veins are shaped in whirlpool shapes. And our trachea, as we breathe in and out, are in whirlpool shapes. And in the center is a seashell. The world's seashells are built to these proportions of whirlpools. And on the bottom right is the cochlea of our ear. This is how we hear. And on the left, bottom, is an electron microscope photograph of a human skin pore. This is how we sweat. This is nature's air conditioning system. So I went to Catholic school, and I noticed that this same shape was incredibly important across all of the world's religions, from the shamanic cultures of the world right through all of the world's organized religions, through all time. This was associated with the mystery of life, with creation, with intelligence, and with fertility. And right up until the Industrial Revolution, I found out that humans were fascinated by this shape. And because we're of nature, we're in nature, pre-industrial, we were taking our cues from nature, so people used the proportions of nature in everything they did, pretty much. If you take a whirlpool and take a cross-section, you'll see it has a spiral that looks like a nautilus shell. Or for designers and architects, it's the Fibonacci progression, or golden geometry, which has inspired people for 2,000 years. All of the grand buildings of the pre-industrial world are all built to this proportion, from the pyramids through. And weaving and pottery, and most of the artifacts that humans actually built were according to these geometries. But then we started in the industrial world. And we decided, because, based on the premise that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If that's the case, and we can't argue with that, then if we're going to use the least energy getting from here to here, we have to go in a straight line. Makes perfect sense. And yet, I couldn't find a single example since the beginning of the universe where nature has ever moved anything in a straight line or ever created a straight line. And yet, in every system in nature, nature designs more energy efficient systems than anything humans do in comparison or trying to achieve the same task. So here we have the Industrial Revolution, and we're making straight pipes, we're cutting straight flat boards, and we're rolling out straight pieces of steel, and there's lots of advantages in that. And we weren't too worried about energy, we didn't really understand it. So we just shoveled in more coal. So there was something wrong with this picture. I joined when I left school, I made my way to a career with the Fisheries and Wildlife Department in Australia, and fabulous job, loved it. I was on the ocean, under the ocean, in the ocean for quite a few years, and I just saw more and more and more examples of how nature was exploiting turbulence. And at the same time, I was very involved with boats, and I saw that our technologies weren't exploiting turbulence, they were actually trying to suppress turbulence. We saw turbulence as the enemy, if you like. So this is back to front. So the other thing, of course, I discovered about nature, being very immersed in it, is nature is clean, green, and sustainable. We've got 10 million species on Earth, and those species, each one of them has hundreds, if not thousands, of solutions to the very problems facing humanity today. And the story of human development over the millennia is really the story of energy use. And we've not been good at it. And look at our modern world. We can really relate many of our major issues to how we're using energy and what are the byproducts of creating that energy. So I decided to leave the Fisheries Department and see if I could bring these shapes into the industrial world in a meaningful way. Can I make products? So the first thing I had to do was understand a vortex. What is a whirlpool? Well, there are very poor definitions in the world of engineering and physics about what turbulence is and what vortices are. So I had to capture one. It took me a while, but I cobbled together a workable vortex out of things that I found in nature. And here it is, the world's first frozen vortex. Wonderful thing about vortices is they're almost frictionless. This is nature's operating system. It's a frictionless machine. Humans don't have frictionless machines. If you think about it, where do we use our energy? Almost all of it is to overcome friction, some for gravity, but most of it's about friction. So here we have this wonderful machine. How can we exploit it? So anyway, built this thing, put a little rotating handle on it, put it in the bath, and I'm rotating it to see if it's going to pump. I wanted to create a propeller for some boats that I was messing around with. It didn't work. I was devastated. I'd spent so many years contemplating, working it out, theorizing. This thing didn't work. And my wife called out, "Why don't you turn it the other way?" Thank you, wife. Turned it the other way. It was fantastic. I mean, this thing really did something. Very surprising. And I have to say, counterintuitive by my standards. So, and there's my wife. So at this point, we knew we had something. We lodged a bunch of patents. We thought, well, the epicenter for science and technology and fluid dynamics is certainly the United States. My wife's American, and her family suggested we should be back here anyway. So we packed up, came to California, and we then wrote to the CEOs of a number of Fortune 100 companies. And we offered to save them major amounts of their energy in their devices. Got great response. We wrote 21 letters, got 17 invitations to meet with CEOs, met with them. They were delighted, they were excited. The story's great because we had a lot of little prototypes and things to demonstrate. We couldn't fit our key into their locks because in the world of mechanical engineering, most of the research had all but disappeared. I mean, most systems, if you think about it, pumps and fans and things, were pretty much evolved by the end of the Second World War, and there's very little development since then. So we couldn't find a way to interface with their engineering and whatever was left of research. So we struggled with this for quite a long time, and we came to the conclusion we're going to have to create our own company. We really didn't want to do this. We were really interested in research. But we had to create a company and show you could actually take this strategy, turn it into products, make some money from it, and of course the world's run on economics. And so if you can show the bottom line is positive, you're going to make an impact. And that's what we're after. We're after impact. So we turned this thing into, well, what was the first application? The municipal drinking water. You see these tanks all around our urban centres, they hold our drinking water. That water sits there for a very long time. In fact, half of it just goes up and down. The top half of it goes up and down, never interchanges. It's stagnant. Think of that. That's a word you wouldn't relate to our drinking water supply, but it's stagnant water. And the sun is beating down on the top layers of water get hot. And the disinfectant chemicals in there quite often end up creating or turning into fertilizers. Chloramine is ammonia, right? Nitrogen's a great fertilizer. So you've got hot water and fertilizer. You have biological events, not good. So municipalities go out with the truck, climb up the ladder, and tip in buckets and buckets and buckets of either chlorine or chloramine. Kind of nasty. It kills off the organisms, but we've all smelt the water at different times. And some of those chemicals are carcinogenic. So we said, well, look, the bottom water's cold. If we could completely circulate that water, we might be able to alleviate a lot of this problem. So we created a device, and here it is. And this is the actual device. It's this size. It's 6 inches active surface high by 4 inches. Put it on a little tripod. Oh, by the way, it looks like an X-ray of a lily from the garden. Every living organism is built to these geometries, whether you can see them at first sight or not. Put it on a little tripod. That tripod's 3 feet tall. Okay, so here we are. Got this little thing in the middle of a tank. And we've got a little motor on it that uses the power of 3 light bulbs. And we want to put it in the drinking water supply. And so we go to the engineers of the municipalities and we say, this is what we want to do. We can save all your problems. And they say, you're from California, right? What are you smoking? How could this possibly have an effect? These tanks are millions of gallons, right? So anyway, we eventually convinced Redwood City municipality to lend us a tank they weren't using. They figured there was no risk. We put it in there. We got some very competent scientists to do an evaluation, proved its efficacy. So then we started this company to market this to the municipalities of America. And today, we've got more than 1,250 of these installed throughout North America, Australia, and the Middle East. One of these devices will circulate 10 million gallons of water. That's a football field 30 feet deep. I'm guessing that this auditorium, just a wild guess, if it were full of water, might be 400,000 or 500,000 gallons. So we're talking 20 times this, and this one tiny little thing completely circulates that water. Not only does it circulate it, it reduces the amount of disinfectant materials required by 85%, and it reduces the amount of energy required by municipalities to keep their water quality up by 85%. This is a dramatic and radical improvement to that industry. So once we had this, because as I said, a vortex is, the geometry of a vortex underlies, whereas the blueprint for all life, and not only life, but for heat transfer, for energy transfer, electrical transfer. Electricity flows the same way water does. So once you have this, there are infinite ways of expressing it. There's one algorithm with 4 variables. So we were able to create all sorts of things, from turbines to new fuselage to boat designs, an entirely new refrigeration system. Every vortex is a heat pump. Water desalination that's using much less energy than anything else that's out there. And fans, just fans for instance. I wonder what you think would be the amount of energy the world spends on fans every year. Might be 1%, 2%. What I can tell you, fans use 22% of global electrical energy. It's a huge burden. We've created fans funded by the state of California. We've created fans that can reduce the energy burden by up to 47%. It's a dramatic shift because fans really haven't progressed much since the Second World War. So this is all biomimicry, right? If you look at nature's energy budget, it's at least 3/4 less than human-designed technology to get the same jobs done. And biomimicry doesn't just relate to energy production and energy consumption. It goes across many other things. In fact, pretty much everything we do as modern humans, biomimicry can apply to. And there are now already 250 radically innovative products in the marketplace making a very big splash. There's 2,500 initiatives we're aware of, and it's reported there's about 100,000 research projects happening in the world today looking at bio-inspiration for reinventing our world. Now, you can see the list. It applies to chemistry, pharma, materials, agriculture, software, aerospace, and medicine, and everything else you can think of. Nanotechnology is biomimicry. Nature builds everything one molecule at a time. No sawdust, no offcuts, no wasted transport costs. This is the future. It's inevitable because it's more profitable and there's much less liability. This is providing the opportunity for new generations to completely reinvent and optimize our industrial world. We can halve the world's energy bill. We can produce more energy out of our energy producing systems. And we can really make the statement that it is absolutely not inevitable that this world is going down the toilet. Thank you.